Hey everybody, it's Joel Hancock here at Hancock Law Firm in Beaufort. I got another video for you today. I want to talk to you about two questions that I hear all the time about getting your case dismissed. Now, I am a criminal defense lawyer in Beaufort, North Carolina. I've handled, close to 4,000 criminal defense cases, speeding to everything from minor traffic violations to serious felonies. And I can tell you that these two questions come up way more often than you would think. The first question is something that I don't even understand where it came from. I did a little bit of research, but I will tell you that I'm going to give you the most definitive answer on this question that I could possibly find. Nowhere else on the internet are you going to find an answer to this question as complete and comprehensive as I'm going to give you. And that question is, I got arrested or I got a speeding ticket from a state trooper that wasn't wearing his hat. Can I get my charge dismissed? The second question is like that, and it's about, this is one where you actually do understand where it's coming from, and it's about Miranda rights. And it goes like this. A lot of times people will say, well, look, I was arrested for DWI or I was arrested for this other thing, and I wasn't read my Miranda rights. Can I get my case dismissed based on that? So the two questions, one about a trooper's hat, the second about Miranda rights. Can you get your case, your criminal case, dismissed on the basis of either of those two things? So with that in mind, I want to tell you a little bit about your framework for analysis when trying to decide whether or not some violation justifies dismissal of a charge. So here's what my framework for analysis usually looks like. First, you look at the alleged violation or whatever illegal conduct you think existed. Was it constitutional? Was it statutory? Or was it regulatory? Those are the three kinds of violations that the government, or in this case, a police officer might commit that may justify some kind of remedy. And so after you learn, or after you figure out what kind of violation that was, then you can go into, well, what's the fix for this? What's the remedy? What happens as a result of this thing that the officer did that I believe was illegal? So a constitutional violation might be something like you were stopped without probable cause. A statutory violation might be something like an officer stopped you outside of his statutory jurisdiction. And a regulatory violation might be something like, in North Carolina, when you're arrested for DWI, the officers are allowed to give you a chemical analysis, or they take a chemical analysis of your breath or blood, and that procedure for getting your breath or for getting your blood is actually determined by certain regulations set out by the Department of Health and Human Services. So those are three kinds of requirements that officers have on them for their conduct: constitutional requirements, statutory requirements, and regulatory requirements. So what kind of remedies are available? Well, sometimes the remedy for a violation of a constitutional, statutory, or regulatory violation is suppression. And here's what suppression means. It means that if they obtained evidence illegally, then that evidence is suppressed in your case. Or in other words, they're not allowed to use that evidence against you. So some examples of that might be evidence that are obtained without a warrant and without a probable cause. That evidence cannot be used against you in your case. That comes down from case law. Another example would be that a breath test result obtained in violation of the Department of Health and Human Services regulations on those chemical analysis, that those results would not be admissible at your trial. That's by statute. And then another example of a kind of remedy that you get for a violation would be like if you were charged a second time for the same crime, that would be double jeopardy. And case law says that the remedy for double jeopardy is a dismissal of the charges. So again, the framework, and we're going to answer each of these questions. The framework is, what kind of violation is it? Is it a constitutional violation, a statutory violation, or a regulatory violation? And what kind of remedy do we get if it was a violation of one of these three? Do we get suppression of evidence, or do we get a dismissal of the charges? So let's use that framework and let's answer the question or respond to that scenario. A trooper wasn't wearing his hat, so therefore the case is invalid, the charge is invalid, and it should be dismissed. Well, what kind of violation could this be? It's certainly not a violation of the U.S. or North Carolina Constitution. There's no constitutional requirement that state troopers wear a hat when they pull you over or when they give you a ticket. So then, is it a statutory requirement? Well, no. There's nothing in the North Carolina general statutes that says or that dictates what state troopers must wear. However, interestingly enough, there is a statute that gives the Department of Public Safety the authority to establish the proper uniform for state troopers and make sure that they have a sufficient number of them. So there is a statute about uniforms, but it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not the charge is valid if they stop you with or without that uniform on. So the Department of Public Safety determines what the state trooper uniform is. And I do know from just personal experience and speaking with state troopers that they are encouraged to wear their hat. The hat is part of their uniform, but they are not required to wear their hat. Not by statute, which we've already discussed, and also the Department of Public Safety does not make the wearing of the hat a requirement. So it's not a regulatory violation either. So that question, it just has no legs from the beginning. It's not a constitutional violation, it's not a statutory violation, and it's not a regulatory violation. So you don't even get into the question of what is the remedy if a state trooper isn't wearing his hat, because there's been no violation that would justify a remedy in the first place. Now, it may be against department policy. It may be frowned upon in the Highway Patrol. It may justify a call to a supervisor, and it may get the trooper in trouble. I'm not saying to do that. I don't want you to get a trooper in trouble. I don't want you to call and say, Joel Hancock told me to call if the trooper wasn't wearing his hat. I'm just telling you that the kind of remedy that you're after, getting a case dismissed because a trooper isn't wearing his hat, that's not going to fly in court in North Carolina. You may be able to get somewhere else with that, but you're not going to get to a dismissal. All right. So that's the trooper's hat, and let's go now to the Miranda question. I was arrested and I was never read my rights. Can my case be dismissed? Okay, let's use our framework again. What kind of violation is this? This is actually a constitutional issue. It's a constitutional error because it violates a couple of provisions of the U.S. Constitution. First, it's the provision against self-incrimination, and then second, it's a violation of the provision about your right to an attorney. So basically, what Arizona versus Miranda, which I believe is 1964, Miranda versus Arizona, 1966. Deals with evidence obtained during a custodial interrogation. And basically what it says is that the police are not allowed to use evidence obtained during a custodial interrogation. So think of this as like you're under arrest, you're not free to leave, and the police are asking you questions. They can't use your answers against you in court unless they let you know that you have a right to remain silent and that you have a right to an attorney at that time. So it's a constitutional error, and the remedy is not a dismissal of the charges. The remedy is that the government can't use anything they obtain during a custodial interrogation against you at trial. So, can the case be dismissed? Well, potentially. It depends on what information or what evidence they obtained as a result of that custodial interrogation. If they arrest you, they don't read you your rights, they start interrogating you, and then you confess to a crime, they can't use that confession against you. But if they have enough other evidence against you to be able to convict you without that confession, then it doesn't really matter. You're still going to get convicted, and you're still potentially going to jail, going to prison. But if the evidence against you isn't sufficient without that testimonial evidence that was obtained without reading you your Miranda rights, then the case can or ought to be dismissed. The state could dismiss it, or without probable cause, or a showing before a judge that there's no probable cause without that information would justify a dismissal from a judge. So those are the two questions that I get, and oddly enough, everybody knows about your Miranda rights, but I probably hear the question about the trooper's hat more than I even hear the question about Miranda rights. I'm not sure where it came from. I did look. There are a couple of states where the uniform of police officers and state troopers is determined by statute, but I didn't see anything that said what a remedy would be if they violated that, except for in the state of Ohio. Interestingly enough, Ohio has a law about, and I thought I had it here. Ohio has a law about officers that write traffic misdemeanors out of uniform, and it says that they basically can't test. I'm not a lawyer in Ohio, so don't go off of this, and this is not legal advice, but it's something that I found. If you're an Ohio attorney, feel free to comment and correct me about this. But the statute says that if you write or if you arrest somebody for a traffic misdemeanor out of uniform, that you can't testify at trial, or your testimony at trial would not be admissible. Now that brings up the question: is a trooper in Ohio that isn't wearing his hat out of uniform? I think the answer to that is no. But it does show you how this idea of somebody not wearing a hat justifying dismissal of the charges maybe can take hold and find its way on a lot of internet message boards or other things like that. But anyway, those are two questions that I hear a lot. Hopefully you've heard a definitive answer about them now. Now when I get this question, I'll be able to just share this video with my clients and help them understand why it is that just because the trooper wasn't wearing a hat doesn't mean that your case is going to get dismissed, because it's not a constitutional violation, it's not a statutory violation, and it's probably not a regulatory violation either. And even if it is a regulatory violation, it's not that there is no remedy specified either in case law or in our statutes for what should happen if they violate that regulation. Then moving on to Miranda, it is a constitutional violation to not or to obtain testimonial evidence from you during custodial interrogation if they haven't first let you know what your rights are. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your case is going to get dismissed. They may still have other evidence against you. The only remedy from our case law on Miranda and the Miranda rights is that that evidence can't be used against you at trial. So anyway, I hope that was helpful for y'all. If you have any other questions about troopers' hats or about Arizona versus Miranda or about other bases for having your case dismissed or having evidence suppressed in North Carolina, be sure to leave me a comment down below. If you like this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, or or let me know in the comments as well. Any other questions or topics that you'd like to see me discuss on the show, please let me know. And otherwise, I will see y'all next week. I think you can see that we didn't have court this week, and so I'm not dressed for court today, but next week we're going to be right back at it. So if y'all have any other questions or anything else, let me know down in the comments. All right. Thanks, everybody.